Most people who hear that question assume the answer is pretty straightforward. A few minutes maybe. But when historians and medical experts actually started examining the full record, something deeply uncomfortable emerged. Impalement wasn't designed to kill quickly, and how long a person could actually survive is far more disturbing than many are prepared for. The earliest confirmed records of impalement as a formal execution method come from the ancient Near East around 1800 BCE. The Assyrians, one of the most militarily dominant civilizations of the ancient world, were among the first to use it in a systematic, organized way. Assyrian kings like Ashurnasirpal II, who ruled from around 883 to 859 BCE, left behind stone carvings and written records showing rebels, prisoners of war, and criminals being impaled on stakes outside city walls. These were public displays, placed at city entrances so every person passing through would see them clearly. The Babylonians later adopted similar practices, and so did the Persians. But it was the Persian Empire that turned impalement into something deeply political. Darius I, who ruled from 522 to 486 BCE, is one of the most well-documented early rulers to use it on a mass scale. After suppressing a major rebellion in Babylon in 521 BCE, he reportedly ordered around 3,000 leading citizens impaled. The Greeks and Egyptians also recorded cases of impalement, but it was less central to their systems. In Egypt, it appeared mainly during periods of conflict with neighboring powers. Greek historian Herodotus documented its use across the Persian Empire in detail. Impalement also shares a structural logic with crucifixion. Both methods were built on the same principle of slow suffering and public exposure. What made impalement especially effective as psychological warfare was how direct the message was. The body itself became the warning. No explanation was needed. And if the victim was still alive when people passed by, moving or moaning, the effect was even more disturbing. Executioners in ancient or medieval times were not untrained. Many were specialists who refined their methods over years, sometimes passed down through generations. Impalement wasn't simply placing a pole through someone. There were controlled techniques, and the method depended on the intended outcome, including quick death, prolonged survival, or maximum public suffering. The stakes were usually wood, sometimes metal, and ranged from about 8 to 15 feet in length. One end was sharpened. Thickness mattered. A thinner stake caused more immediate internal tearing, while a thicker, smoother one could be guided more carefully through the body, sometimes avoiding instantly fatal damage. When the goal was extended survival, the stake was often coated in animal fat or oil. This reduced tearing, allowing smoother penetration through tissue, and, in practice, it could keep the victim alive longer. The most common method was vertical impalement. The victim was lowered onto the sharpened stake, which entered through the lower body, usually the perineum, the area between the legs. The angle was carefully controlled to avoid the spine, since damaging it could cause instant paralysis and unconsciousness, which defeated the purpose of prolonged execution. From there, the stake could pass upward through the abdominal cavity, sometimes moving past major organs and continuing high enough that the tip could emerge near the chest, shoulder, or neck. Once the body was fixed and the stake planted, gravity slowly caused the person to slide further down over hours. The second variation was horizontal impalement, where the stake passed through the body from side to side or front to back. This method was less common and usually resulted in faster death, since it didn't create the same prolonged downward pressure as vertical impalement. Now the medical reality becomes even more disturbing. The human body can survive severe internal trauma for longer than most people expect, as long as certain critical structures aren't destroyed. The abdominal cavity contains organs like the intestines, stomach, liver, kidneys, and bladder. Injury to these is extremely serious, but not always immediately fatal. A person could survive punctured intestines for hours. The infection that follows, peritonitis, is extremely painful and usually fatal, but it develops over time, sometimes over days. The liver is highly vascular, meaning it contains many blood vessels. Damage to it causes heavy internal bleeding, but survival for hours is still possible in trauma situations. The kidneys can also be damaged without immediate death. Even lung punctures, known as pneumothorax, can leave a person alive for a period, though in severe distress. Death typically comes from one of several causes: massive bleeding from major vessels, damage to the heart or aorta, infection from ruptured organs, respiratory failure from lung damage, or shock caused by combined trauma and blood loss. When major structures were avoided, survival could last anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. In rare documented cases, it extended to 2 or even 3 days, usually ending through dehydration, infection, and organ failure. That's the biological reality. By the peak of the Persian Empire in the 5th century BCE, impalement was already a known tool of power across a wide region stretching from the Middle East into North Africa and parts of Europe. Xerxes I, who ruled from 486 to 465 BCE, used it after military victories and also as punishment for commanders who failed him. After the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, Xerxes allegedly had the body of the Spartan king Leonidas, already dead in battle, impaled and beheaded as a final insult. In North Africa, the Carthaginians, rivals of Rome, used impalement as punishment for military failure. General Hanno the Great is reported in some accounts to have been executed in this way after political conflict or failure. Whether every detail is fully accurate or shaped by later Roman accounts, the pattern remains consistent. Military leadership came with the constant risk of extreme punishment for defeat. The Roman Empire occasionally used impalement, though crucifixion was far more common. Romans considered impalement a barbaric practice, even though both methods shared the same logic. Roman historian Tacitus recorded its use among frontier tribes. Julius Caesar also described similar practices during his campaigns in Gaul between 58 and 50 BCE. In the Indian subcontinent, the Mauryan Empire under Chandragupta Maurya included impalement in legal codes described in the Arthashastra attributed to Kautilya. It was prescribed for serious crimes like killing a Brahmin or burning royal property. By the fall of Rome and the rise of successor kingdoms, impalement had spread across a wide geographic area and been used by many cultures. In the 15th century, Vlad III came into power in Wallachia, in what is now Romania. He used it so frequently and on such a visible scale that it became permanently tied to his name in history. He was born around 1428, the second son of Vlad II Dracul, a ruler and member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order created to fight the Ottoman Empire. At age 11 in 1442, Vlad and his younger brother Radu were taken as hostages by the Ottoman Sultan Murad II to secure his father's loyalty. He spent years in Ottoman custody, where he witnessed their system of power and developed a lasting hostility toward them. After his father and older brother were killed in 1447, Vlad entered a long struggle to claim the throne of Wallachia. He briefly ruled in 1448, was removed, lived in exile, and finally regained power in 1456. His second reign, from 1456 to 1462, is where most of his documented brutality occurred. His main targets were the Wallachian boyars, the noble class whom he blamed for betrayal and corruption. In one 1957 incident, he invited hundreds of boyars and their families to an Easter feast, then arrested them. The older nobles were impaled immediately. The younger survivors were forced to rebuild the fortress at Poenari under brutal conditions, with many dying from exhaustion. This was both punishment and political control. At the same time, he used impalement against criminals, such as thieves, corrupt merchants, and others. This made him popular with many common people who experienced lower crime during his rule. One famous story says a golden cup was left in a public square in Târgoviște, and no one dared steal it. His conflict with the Ottoman Empire defined his legacy. In 1461, he stopped paying tribute to Mehmed II and began raids across Ottoman territory. In response, Mehmed II led a large invasion in 1462. As Ottoman forces approached Târgoviște, they reportedly found around 20,000 impaled prisoners, Ottoman soldiers, and Bulgarian Muslims, arranged outside the city as a warning. Some accounts say even Mehmed II hesitated after seeing it. Vlad continued resistance through guerrilla warfare, including a night attack on July 17, 1462, which nearly killed Mehmed II. He was later forced out, imprisoned by allies, briefly returned to power in 1476, and died shortly after in battle. His story later merged with legend through Bram Stoker's Dracula, which borrowed his name and associations, but turned him into a fictional vampire. The blood-drinking myth was invented, but the historical image of mass impalement became part of European memory for centuries. While Vlad was using impalement as a defensive terror tactic in Eastern Europe, the Ottoman Empire had its own long history with the method. Ironically, the Ottomans both suffered impalement at Vlad's hands and also used it themselves across centuries of imperial rule. Ottoman law under the Kanun, the imperial legal code most fully developed under Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, included impalement as a prescribed punishment for specific crimes. These were typically considered extreme offenses, such as sodomy, murder, and rebellion against the state. Unlike the chaotic mass executions linked to figures like Vlad, Ottoman impalement was often part of a formal judicial system. It was carried out by trained executioners in controlled public settings, usually city squares or visible open spaces, where the punishment could serve as a warning. European diplomats and travelers who visited Constantinople during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries left multiple written accounts describing these executions. One of the most important observers was Ogier Ghiselin de Busbecq, a Flemish diplomat who served as ambassador of Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I at the Ottoman court from 1554 to 1562. In his letters, he described Ottoman punishments in detail, including impalement. He noted the precision of executioners and described how the method could be controlled to prolong suffering rather than end life quickly. According to his accounts, trained executioners could sometimes keep a victim alive for extended periods by carefully managing the entry path of the stake. His letters, published in 1589, were widely read in Europe and helped shape both fascination and fear around Ottoman justice. The Ottomans also used impalement during periods of political instability. One of the most notable examples comes from the Janissary revolts of the 17th century, uprisings involving the elite Janissary military corps, who at times overthrew or pressured sultans they opposed. During these power struggles, impalement was used by both sides. Sultans reportedly impaled rebellious Janissary leaders, while Janissary factions, in at least some recorded cases, used the same punishment against officials loyal to the Sultan. Ottoman court records mention these events often enough to show that impalement still functioned as a political tool, even if it was gradually becoming less central over time. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, pressure from European states began influencing how the Ottoman Empire was viewed internationally. Western observers increasingly labeled Ottoman punishments as barbaric, and this growing political pressure aligned with internal reform movements. The Tanzimat reforms, beginning in 1839 under Sultan Abdulmajid I, marked a major shift toward modern legal structures influenced by European models. These reforms aimed to standardize justice and phase out older punishments, including impalement. By the mid-19th century, it had largely disappeared from official Ottoman law, although isolated and unverified reports suggest rare instances may have continued in remote regions into the 1860s. The practice appeared independently in multiple parts of the world, often in societies that had no direct contact with each other. In China, records of staking and impalement-like punishments appear as far back as the Han Dynasty, roughly 206 BCE to 220 CE. Across different dynasties and periods of political collapse, rebel leaders, criminals, and political enemies were executed in ways that involved public display, and sometimes physical exposure on stakes or similar structures. More broadly, imperial Chinese justice systems consistently relied on public executions as a way to reinforce authority over a population spread across vast territory, and this practice continued in various forms for more than 2,000 years. In Japan, crucifixion was more commonly used, but impalement-style punishments also appear in records during periods of civil war. The most violent of these was the Sengoku period, spanning from the mid-15th century to early 17th centuries, when Japan was fractured into competing warlord states. Leaders like Oda Nobunaga, who lived from 1534 to 1582, are recorded in Japanese chronicles as carrying out mass public executions against enemies and religious groups. Some of these accounts describe methods that included staking or similar forms of body exposure, especially during periods of religious suppression and military consolidation. In sub-Saharan Africa, European colonial reports from the 17th to 19th centuries describe impalement in various kingdoms during wartime as a form of capital punishment. One frequently cited example is the Kingdom of Dahomey, located in present-day Benin. However, these accounts come almost entirely from colonial observers, meaning they carry clear bias, often written to frame African societies in ways that justified European intervention and conquest. Because of that, historians treat these reports cautiously, rather than as neutral descriptions. In the Americas, pre-Columbian civilizations, such as the Aztec Empire, practiced complex systems of ritual violence and public execution tied to political and religious authority. Spanish conquistador accounts describe methods that sometimes resemble impalement or staking, although these descriptions are also heavily filtered through the perspective of invading forces, with an interest in portraying indigenous societies as brutal. This makes the exact details uncertain, but the broader pattern of public, symbolic execution is well documented. Now we're returning to the key question using modern medical knowledge, because the history reports of people surviving for hours or even days are not simply exaggerations. Modern trauma medicine has repeatedly shown that the human body can remain functional after catastrophic penetrating injuries, including cases similar to impalement caused by industrial accidents, falls onto metal rods, and wartime injuries. Survival time depends almost entirely on what gets hit and what gets avoided. The aorta is one of the most critical structures. If it's damaged, death can occur within minutes due to massive blood loss. Similarly, liver and intestines can also cause death, but a little longer than the heart or aorta. Dehydration adds another layer. A body exposed outdoors, often in heat, sometimes in sunlight and under constant stress, loses fluid rapidly through open wounds and respiration. Dehydration worsens pain, accelerates organ failure, and leads to confusion and delirium. In prolonged cases of impalement, victims would likely transition from full awareness to confusion and eventually unconsciousness as dehydration, blood loss, and infection combine. But in the early phase, full consciousness was still possible, which is why the method was historically used. Modern trauma surgeons reviewing historical descriptions generally agree that survival for 12 to 48 hours is medically plausible when major organs are not directly damaged. Beyond 48 hours, survival becomes increasingly unlikely due to combined infection, blood loss, and organ failure. But extreme edge cases are still theoretically possible depending on the exact injury path and the body's response. One famous modern comparison is Phineas Gage, a railroad worker in Vermont in 1847 who survived a 13-pound iron rod about 3.5 feet long, being blasted through his skull during an explosion. The rod entered through his cheek and exited through the top of his skull, passing through his frontal lobe. Remarkably, he remained conscious, walked afterward, and lived for 12 more years. While not impalement in the traditional sense, it demonstrates a core medical reality that humans can remain alive and functional even after injuries that appear instantly fatal, depending on what structures are missed. By the late 18th century, impalement, along with many other forms of public torture and execution, began to decline across Europe due to major shifts in political philosophy, law, and public attitudes. One of the most influential thinkers behind this change was Cesare Beccaria, an Italian legal theorist whose 1764 work on crimes and punishments argued that justice should be rational, proportionate, and focused on preventing crime rather than creating spectacle. His ideas influenced major legal reforms across Europe and even early legal thinking in the United States. Over time, the logic of public, prolonged execution began to lose support, as evidence suggested that extreme punishments didn't reliably reduce crime and instead created fear mixed with instability. France moved quickly during the Revolutionary period, eventually adopting the guillotine in 1792 as a standardized method of execution, intended to be quicker and more equal across classes. Britain shifted toward hanging as its primary execution method, standardizing capital punishment in a more controlled form. Prussia, Austria, and Russia also reformed their legal systems during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, gradually removing the most extreme and theatrical forms of execution. Outside Europe, the process took longer. The Ottoman Empire, as mentioned earlier, formally moved away from impalement through the Tanzimat reforms beginning in 1839. In colonized regions of Asia and Africa, European expansion often led to the suppression of local judicial systems that included practices like impalement. However, this suppression was not purely humanitarian. It was also tied to colonial control and legal restructuring imposed by imperial powers. Despite its disappearance from formal law, impalement didn't vanish completely from human behavior. There are documented cases in the 20th century where it reappeared during periods of extreme violence, particularly in genocides and collapsed states. During the Armenian genocide, survivor testimonies and foreign reports describe instances of impalement used against civilians. Similar isolated reports appear in other 20th century conflicts across Africa and Asia, though these were not part of any legal system. They were acts of extreme brutality during periods where normal structures of law had completely broken down.